All right. 3, 2, 1. Why, hello there, guys. Welcome back to the Evidence-Based Excellence Podcast, yet again, with your host and friendly neighborhood far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. How are you all doing today? Got a couple of good bits to go through today, that if you can hear in the background, my fellow thought criminal and fellow four-legged friendly neighborhood far-right thug, Ms. Bailey, is wandering around the room listening to me begrudgingly. Have to keep it in here and shut the door. But anyway, so coming to you from a brand new addition to the setup. So you may or may not have known that all of the episodes so far, apart from a couple, were being recorded on my phone. But if you have a look here, ta-da! No phone today. And not even on the normal secondary camera that I was using for a while. No, because I have a very, very interesting and I feel amazing project coming up next Friday from the time that I am recording this. I am re-recording this episode on Thursday, the 19th, of September. Friday, the 17th. No, I'm getting this all wrong. This is the precise reason why I decided to re-record this episode, because I was getting my thoughts all out of whack and saying the wrong things all the time. This episode is not off to a great start. Let's hope that it continues. Let's hope that it doesn't continue in that. Let's just keep it going. Friday the 27th of September. We actually have a very interesting episode that we're going to be recording. I'm in the very privileged position that I get to have a nice conversation on this podcast with somebody that I know, who I feel is an amazing mentor. He's been an amazing mentor to me, and we're going to have a, no doubt, amazing conversation, probably about Stoic philosophy, jiu-jitsu, and many, many other things. On that Friday. I've wanted to get him on the podcast for a little while, but haven't been able to logistically do so. So one of the things I needed was a new camera, a camera to record it with. And that's what you're seeing me on right now. I managed to invest in a new camera, a Canon Legria HFG 40. And I have another one on the way very, very soon. So I'm hoping the picture quality is good. I can already see that the focus, and it's following me along as I do my movements and all stuff like that. It doesn't seem to be losing focus. And hopefully it's going to be an amazing addition to the podcast and really up its quality. And yeah, give you guys the best viewing experience on that could be done. So yeah, very, very excited. I've got another camera coming today now, and obviously that'll be the last thing that I need then, ready to go for next week's, no doubt, amazing podcast. This person, we train jiu-jitsu together, and we've had conversations going into hours after training, not just about training, but about life in general. This guy's just an amazing guy in my opinion, and very, very important figure to me, and somebody who is a very large inspiration behind me even giving stuff like this a go, wanting to get my own business off the ground, wanting to go into these ventures of giving value to you guys. And I don't think, had I, not had the interactions and not had the privilege of learning from this person that I have, that I ever would have started something like this. So although it is still, infinitesimally small compared to some of the other podcasts out there, especially, the likes of Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and whoever else, many, many other podcasts that are bigger than mine, obviously come from a very, very small area that 99.9, I reckon, percent of the population, if you ask them to point to it on a map, they'd never find. Some of them wouldn't even find the country. So yeah, very, very excited about that. Stay tuned for that next Friday. Now, the reason, as I said, I'm re-recording this episode, it's about heat therapy today. So we're going to be going through, if I get my notes up a bit quick, because in my last couple of episodes, or in a series of episodes prior, I highlighted a lot of what seemed to be shortcomings relative to cold water or cold therapy, particularly with regarding muscle growth and muscle hypertrophy and muscular strength and muscle protein synthesis, and everything regarding building muscle. So a lot of my current research is focused around, very, very hypertrophy and strength focused personally. So having done a lot of research into recovery and particularly heat for my dissertation when I was in uni several years ago, thought it'd be good to go back over some of the data regarding heat therapy. Now, this is heat therapy in general. Some of the studies which we've talked about use environmental chambers. Some of the studies, because we've got 2 comprehensive reviews we're talking about today, going to be, obviously the studies within those, are going to be using different methods, okay? So particularly when you're looking at a comprehensive review or literature review or narrative review, you're going to be seeing studies that have a wide different array of methodologies, and then they talk about those various different methodologies in the context of what studies showed what results using those methods. So we're going to be going through the question of, and the prompt was, I realized I deleted it from my notes on accident and I forgot to put it back in, but if I go into the history, it is, where is it? There we go. So this that you're going to be seeing in a moment, this little bar graph from Consensus, the website or the search engine, the AI-powered search engine Consensus, which in my opinion is quite a nice, useful tool if you want to get relevant research into a particular question very quickly. So if you ask the question, for example, this is the prompt that I used to generate to bring the studies forward that were most relevant to the question. Does heat therapy have a positive effect on muscle hypertrophy? I'll repeat that one more time. Does heat therapy have a positive effect on muscle hypertrophy? That was the question. Consensus tends to like yes or no questions because then it will give you this consensus meter. Okay, so that's what you're going to be seeing now. As you can see, it says yes at 79%, possibly at 14%, and then no at 7%. So it's showing you overall what the research tends to suggest based on the results of the studies that it analyzed. In this case, it analyzed 14 papers. We're not going to be going through all 14 papers today. We're going to be doing several episodes on this because I want to break down some of the papers within this little introduction to the topic in more detail. But the consensus rating, as you can see, likely yes. So let's delve into a little bit about why that may be. When we're looking at things like that, this is where, although you've got to be careful when extrapolating out animal data or cell culture data, also known as mechanistic data, which you can go listen to my mechanistic data episode from before, if you want to learn a little bit more about what mechanistic data is and what it's useful for. You've got to be careful with extrapolating it out to humans. But when we want to look at how something works, how a particular mechanism works, how a particular cellular interaction works, how a particular treatment, when you're looking at it regarding how it interacts with cells in a petri dish and all stuff like that. Mechanistic data can be useful for observing what happens. So obviously when you're doing a study within a large human population, for example, and you're just doing treatment and effect, you don't necessarily want to know what's going on mechanistically. You just know that treatment is causing outcome, which is very valuable and very useful information, but you don't necessarily know why or understand how that's happening. That's when mechanistic data can be useful. So this is one study from Al-Sabah and colleagues from 2023, and it was a study in male Sprague Dawley rats. And to assess what they were assessing, they had to induce diabetes mellitus in these rats. That is because they wanted to measure how good heat therapy was, seemingly, at reducing the diabetes mellitus-induced muscle atrophy that occurs when this disease is present in rats, for example. So they had a 6-week overall duration study. So it was fairly short, but, you know, there's been studies that have been done over a lot shorter time frame. You know, our study was done over, 2 weeks, if that, when we did it for our dissertation. But that was because it was a counterbalance study. But we're going through a little bit about what counterbalance means a little bit later, because we have got a counterbalance trial in this episode to talk about. So they also took measurements at 3 and 6 weeks. So they had 2 measurements periods. They had one at 3 weeks and then one at 6 weeks. And then they had 4 trial arms of the study. They had a control group, they had a heat therapy group, and then they also had a diabetic and diabetic plus heat therapy group. Okay, so then you're looking at the study protocols. So the heat therapy was an environmental or temperature chamber, set of 42 degrees, and the heat groups were exposed to heat therapy every day for their allotted time, whether it was 3 or 6 weeks, for 30 minutes daily. Okay, so that was the heat therapy. 42 degrees, 30 minutes every day for 3 or 6 weeks in the heat therapy and the diabetic plus heat therapy groups. Then we have the results. So the main one that we wanted to look at, which is quite interesting, when we're looking at muscle atrophy, okay, it's an important thing to consider, not just with regards to muscle growth, but obviously we've talked about before, growing muscle or muscle tissue is consistently undergoing cycles of building up or synthesis and breaking down or catabolism. So it's going through synthesis and breakdown constantly. The way I like to break it down, not quite literally in that way, but the way that I like to explain it, the way I had it explained to me, and it sort of resonated with me, it's the way that Lane Norton explains it. And it's muscle protein synthesis or muscle growth is a bit like a dimmer switch. Okay. So when you're in a very high anabolic state, it's like you're building up a lot. Your synthesis element is very, very high. Your breakdown element is very, very low, but they never completely turn on or off. Okay, there's always a little bit of breakdown going on, even when you're in high synthesis times, when you've just had a meal, for example, when you just trained. So you're in that 24-hour period after training where your muscle protein synthesis is elevated significantly as a result of the recovery process. And then your breakdown is very low in that period. Breakdown is higher in the workout because obviously you're physically breaking the structures down. But in that recovery period, synthesis far exceeds breakdown, and that's what allows you then to grow over time. But breakdown is never completely turned off. It's like a dimmer switch. It's never completely on, but even when you're in a state of catabolism predominantly, synthesis is never fully turned off. It's a bit like a balance that's constantly swinging back and forth, a bit like a seesaw, okay? But they're never completely turned off. And what we tended to see, though, was that muscle cross-sectional area measurements that they took indicated that muscle atrophy was reduced by 34.3% in the heat therapy group by week 3, and then it was also reduced further by 44.1% overall in week 6 in the diabetic heat therapy groups. So that's very, very important to consider. Already we have an insight into one thing that heat therapy seems to do that's a positive for people with muscle growth and muscle strength oriented goals. It seems to help, at least in this data, minimize muscle breakdown. So obviously you're going to result in greater net anabolic states over time. Very, very important to consider. How does that happen, though? How does that happen? Well, some things they did find out was that heat therapy seemed to significantly decrease markers of muscle atrophy. Now, the 3 which they seem to highlight here were known as CD86, KLF, and MAFBX, also known as atrogen 1. So let's go into a little bit about what they are at the minute. CD68 Oh, is this ED68 or CD86? Oh no, I typed it wrong in my notes. Oh, where's the trial? Let me have a look. I want to go back to the paper a minute. Because where is it to? It was CD68. I'm sorry. I said it wrong the first time. I typed it wrong in my notes. Let me rectify that. There we go. So there we go. I was a bit confused by that. So CD68, sorry, is a member of the scavenger receptor family of molecules or of cells, which help clear cellular debris. They activate macrophages, which are those scavenger cells. And then also macrophages, one of the things that hypothesized or seem to play a vital role, I say vital role, pivotal role, I should say, really, in atherosclerosis, because they're these cells that if there's these little deposits left within the bloodstream, or if there's like leftover nutrients within the bloodstream, well, they'll grab hold of those nutrients and then they cling to the vessel, the interior cell wall or the interior membrane of the blood vessel, and as those atheromas build up, that's what actually clogs the artery up. So these things not exactly good. But as I said, they help clear cellular debris, which is a very important aspect of breaking things down so that they can be rebuilt. And then they also promote phagocytosis, which is the process of one cell engulfing a large particle, such as a bacteria, using its plasma membrane. So this is just a member of the breakdown family of cells, basically. And it felt that they, or rather it showed that it significantly reduced their number. Not only that, KLF, which is a protein transcription factor that leads to diabetes-induced muscle atrophy when found in abundance. See, in abundance is when it's in very high numbers. So if it is brought down to lower numbers, you get less muscle atrophy, less diabetes-induced muscle atrophy. So that's another thing it found to decrease. And then MAFBX, also known as atrogen-1, is a muscle-specific ubiquitin ligase that seems to play a role in muscle atrophy and is seen in several disease conditions. Increases in this promote muscle atrophy by enhancing the degradation of MyoD, which is something, or which is a getting my words mixed up again. This is the precise reason why I chose to record this episode. This is so annoying. Degradation of MyoD, which is a muscle transcription factor. So when atrogen-1 is high, it promotes the degradation of things that would transcribe to build more muscle. So it negatively impacts the muscle growth process. It's a catabolic signaler. And then also EIF3F, which is an essential activator of muscle protein synthesis. So also decreases muscle protein synthesis. Obviously, that's going to lead to less growth, less anabolism over time as well, or less anabolism in that given period of time. What they also found was that it significantly elevated, this is the heat therapy now, significantly elevated muscle hypertrophy markers, namely AKT, mTOR, and heat shock protein 70. So that's also very, very important to consider. So literally from here, we're seeing now what heat therapy seemed to do in contrast to cold therapy is that it decreased markers of catabolism, decreased the catabolic signaling, and seemed to increase the anabolic signaling. That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. So I will say, although I haven't got the study in here right now, I will see if I can find it and put it down the notes below. I have read a study before because I was looking to do this for my dissertation project, but it had already been done. As far as I know, from what I read before, Kaz Fuchs, the guy that wrote the paper, or the guy that was the lead author on the paper that I cited in my previous episodes talking about cold water immersion, where I showed that it decreased, or rather I showed that it stated it decreased muscle protein synthesis rates compared with non-heating. I will say that heating doesn't seem to directly upregulate muscle protein synthesis in the same way. So that doesn't seem to be a mechanism by how heat therapy works to increase muscle hypertrophy. It seems to be more so to do with these molecular signals. I'll see if I can find that paper and put it down below. I remember reading that a little while ago. This assertion, however, the assertion that the decreased markers of muscle atrophy and increased markers of muscle hypertrophy is supported by previous research, particularly in rats again. So it's supported by previous rat research showing that heat therapy seemed to have positive or stimulative effects on the AKT-mTOR muscle hypertrophy pathway using 41 degrees. So interesting to see some interesting results there. Now we're going to go into a little bit more data now. talking about some of these other things that we sort of highlighted here, coming from a narrative review by Magorm and colleagues. Going to research this paper. If you're listening to this, it's PMID 29470824. I'm going to find it now. A little summary of it. The purported benefits of heat were the attenuation of muscle injury and performance decrements, and also the enhancing therapeutic effects that assist recovery and adaptation. It's a little bit about that, which we're going to come to towards the end, where heat and sleep can sometimes go together very, very nicely. Not in the way of trying to make the bedroom warmer when you're sleeping or whatever, not in that way, but it'll enhance other recovery factors such as sleep in other ways, which we'll get onto towards the end of this episode. And we got some of the purported mechanisms. The two we're going to focus on at the minute are the kinases in a mammalian target of rapamycin or mTOR pathway. I'll say that again. So mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. That's what that stands for. Okay. Sometimes you might also see it as the mechanistic target. I've seen that cited. I've seen that in a couple of other papers also. But typically it's referred to as the mammalian target of rapamycin. And then we're also going to look at a couple of genes, or a little bit of intro into some of the genes that are associated with muscle hypertrophy. So the mTOR kinases. The activity of mTOR kinases play vital roles in downstream and upstream hypertrophic processes, and kinase activity increases after strength and hypertrophy exercise and decreases during detraining. Okay, let's give you an example. So we've got an example here of protein kinase B. Protein kinase B is also known as AKT. Okay, you've seen that before, AKT/mTOR. Okay, it's upstream of mTOR. And the phosphorylation of protein kinase B is elevated during muscular overload, okay? In rodents, for example, it has also been observed that heat stress significantly elevates AKT, the signaling of AKT, sorry. So you can get increased phosphorylation of this hypertrophic signaler via resistance training or mechanical stress, but then you also get it from heat stress, which is interesting to see. That'd be one of the mechanisms potentially by, as I said, we've seen these positive benefits on muscle hypertrophy. So for example, using hot water immersion, rat soleus and plantaris muscles were analyzed at temperatures ranging from 34 to 41 degrees in 1 degree increments, so 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. They showed that protein kinase B, or AKT, phosphorylation in the soleus muscle was increased when temperatures of 40 to 41 degrees were used. And in the plantaris, they even seem to show elevations at 39 degrees, up to 41. So that was interesting. In humans, there's another study here. Comparing heat stress and no heat stress, they found that AKT, or protein kinase B, went up by 1.5-fold. mTOR was also 1.5-fold, and I believe ribosomal protein 6, or RPS6, was also significantly elevated, though I think I forgot to make a note of how much it increased by. They were all significantly elevated at 1 hour post-exercise compared to no heat treatment. If you want to go look at that study, that's PMID 2122186. Sounds like I'm reading off a phone number on some gambling advert when I say it like that. But that's some of the activity that seems to have been shown with regards to heat having positive influences on the mTOR, the AKT-mTOR pathway, some of the kinases within it, such as ribosomal protein S6 or ribosomal protein 6. You also have hypertrophy genes. So heating may promote greater cell differentiation and alter the expression of various genes, kinases, and transcription factors involved in muscle remodeling, depending on the temperature and duration of the exposure. So that makes sense, because obviously we didn't see in the previous example with the kinases, for example, we didn't see the benefits for heating in the 37 to 38 range, only in the plantaris muscle when it hit 39 onwards, and in the soleus when it hit 40 onwards. So that's interesting. Analysis has indicated that cells cultured in higher temperatures, so namely 39 to 41 degrees, again, have increased expression. Sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing when I go onto my notes app. I don't know why it keeps going. The cursor keeps going the same color as the background. So the background is white and the cursor keeps going the same color. It's annoying. So cells cultured in higher temperatures have increased expression of genes involved in myogenesis, myofibrillogenesis, so the creation of new myofibrils, muscle hypertrophy, as well as atrophy versus the control condition. Okay. Others have shown curation in heat to prevent the associated decrease in muscle cell diameter. So that's interesting, again, highlighting that positive with regards to reducing muscle atrophy when cells are cultured with heat, and muscle cell protein content. That's interesting. That results from muscle damage treatments. So, for example, one of the treatments that they use to induce muscle damage in these ways is known as a dexamethasone, something which is used just to create muscle damage, and they've used that to assess in a way to see if heat has the restorative or protective benefits, and that's something to do with heat shock proteins as well. They're quite cytoprotective. And it indicates that heat may have protective effects against breakdown, negative effects resulting from exercise induced or from induced injury. Okay, so that's another interesting thing to see. We're going to go through this paper in a lot more detail because it's a very long paper. Came out about 6 years ago now, so it's very, very long. I'll probably go through the other one at the end as well. We've got a little extract from a comprehensive review at the end, which came out a little bit later, came out 2 years later, but we're going to go through a little bit of that, but then we can go through those papers in their entirety in an entire podcast episode. They probably, you know, all of these papers really, randomized control trials. If you wanted to do like a full breakdown of the paper, like go and try and read all of the sources and put together like a comprehensive review in a podcast format of a comprehensive review, God, that's going to take you a hell of a long time. So as I said, we're just glossing over them now, but obviously that's why you're encouraged to go and read them. Also, you're encouraged to go and read them. So next one, we're looking now. Another question that you may ask. So does it need to be, for example, whole body heat? Or does it need, or can I get away with something like localized immersion? So can I just like dip my legs in the bath or something like that? Or just even heat one leg if I'm having trouble with it? Or do I have to do something that immerses my entire body or elevates my whole body temperature? So that'd be something like hot water immersion or a sauna, whether it be water coal powered, you know, steam powered, or whether it be infrared or something. Or do I get the positive benefits locally with something like a heat pack or, you know, a heated garment or whatever? That was actually the subject of our dissertation, was heated garments, namely heated leg garments on recovery. It was a very interesting trial to run. Maybe I can break down that at a later date as well. So we had to write a full paper on that. So that's quite good to do. Very, very interesting and enjoyable topic and trial we had to do. Very, very enjoyable. So when we're looking at the methods for this trial, so we had male participants in this one. So this is a human trial. This is not an animal trial. This is a human trial. 9 participants overall. So quite a small sample size, but obviously there might be all you can get depending on who your audience is, depending on who your target, you know, population is, and depending on what sort of availability you get, how many responses you get. You know, who meets the criteria for eligibility. You know, you can't always have high population sizes. So we have a controlled experimental counterbalance study. Now, I mentioned that our dissertation also was counterbalance. All counterbalance means is that the participants themselves served as their own controls. Okay, so in this study, for example, they had one arm of the study was whole body heating, and then another arm of the study was localized heating. Now, localized means they were heating one part of the body. And then the control condition was the part of the body that was just the opposite of it. So, for example, the opposite leg that wasn't being heated in this trial was the control leg. Okay, so the control condition was the leg that wasn't being heated. The localized condition had one leg being heated, and then whole body condition was whole body being heated. Okay, so that's how it worked. But the way you do it is that you have participants are typically randomized to one or the other. Now, the only thing is with this one, because obviously they're serving as their own controls, you can't necessarily take into account things like placebo and all stuff like that. It can affect the results, but sometimes it's just the best that you can do. And especially if you've got low participant numbers like this, you need a control group. Let's not forget, you need a control group. You need something to compare the results of the experimental trial to, always. And sometimes you just got to get participants to serve as their own controls. Okay. Now, obviously, one of the things you like to do in studies, if you can, is blinding, maybe blinding the participants to what trial they are receiving. But then if you can, going ahead further and blinding the researchers to what condition is which, so that there's a less risk of researcher bias, okay? You can't always do that. You can't always blind, okay? So for example, if you're doing a trial with cold water immersion, you can't blind your participants to it. It's not possible, because you can't put them in cold water up to the neck, for example, and not have them realize that they are in cold water. Okay, it cannot be done. Namely, the same, you cannot put a heat pack on somebody's back and then have another trial where somebody's not having a heat pack put on their back and be blinded to which one it is, because it's a physical sensation that will be felt. Now, if you're doing a trial into a particular supplement, for example, and it comes in a particular capsule or whatever that is, let's just say it's purple and white, it's a purple and white capsule. Well, you can do a placebo with that quite easily, because you can not tell the participants which one they are receiving and make the capsules look the same and make them taste the same. Now, that will negate the placebo effect as best as possible, okay, provided they obviously don't know which one they're receiving beforehand. So you can do it with some instances, you can't do it with others. The way you sometimes try to get around it, or to maintain your scientific rigorousness, is by using participants as their own controls. And that's what we did in ours, because we had a group of netball players that were our study participants, and we know we didn't have enough to do a dedicated control and study arm, because we wouldn't have had enough participants to justify the study. We wouldn't have had enough statistical power. So we had to have them serve as their own controls. So we had 2 full completed data sets. So how did they heat? So the whole body was in an environmental chamber, which is not surprising, 44 to 50 degrees Celsius, and at 50% relative humidity. Whole point of that, and they had to keep it within a range, so sometimes they would have to change the temperature slightly, because they were taking core temperature measurements continuously throughout, and they wanted to reach a core temperature of 39 degrees. Now, when they hit 39 degrees, they would adjust the temperature accordingly to keep it there. So for example, if they initially put it to 50 degrees, and then the participants started creeping up above that 39 degrees in their core temperature, getting up towards 40 and stuff like that, then they want to bring it back down, okay? You know, for the purpose of the study, but also for their safety as well. So you had 50% relative humidity and 44 to 50 degrees. And then the localized condition was completed in normal ambient conditions. I think it was just back in the lab. So the room temperature was about 22 degrees Celsius, and then it was about 60% relative humidity. But they did have a water perfused garment on one of their legs. Now that was heated by water in a separate bath that it was connected to, and that was kept roughly with a mean temperature of 49 degrees. Okay, by the time it reached the pant leg, or by the time it reached the participant, it seemed to drop slightly. Now that would be expected, because obviously as it's going through the pipes, as it's going through the garment, as it's transitioning heat energy to the leg, obviously some of it is going to be lost in that process. So you did have a 45.5 degrees plus or minus 2.2 that I could see for the, and that's degrees centigrade, sorry, or degrees Celsius for the pant leg temperature. But obviously that's right smack bang pretty much in the middle, nearly, of the same temperature that was in the environmental chamber. Okay, and both of these conditions were 60 minutes in duration. Obviously, whilst they are having the pant leg on, the other leg then, say they've got it on the left leg, their right leg is served then as the control condition. So. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about that counterbalance design. So one thing you definitely do need as well, you need a control condition. Obviously, that's why you get the participants to serve as their own controls. However, you also need a washout period. And the washout period in this study was a week. And that's okay. That's fine. The washout period, as it would imply, is simply designed to wash out any residual effects of the previous treatment or the condition that they were exposed to first. Okay, particularly for the experimental condition. So for example, people who are doing the whole body heating, if you were to do it whole body heating and then like go straight into localized heating and not even take into account the fact that the core temperature is still elevated and all the rest of it, well, you then have another confounding variable that you didn't take into account. That part of the study is completely, you throw it out. Okay, so that's why you need a washout period. We had a washout period, for example, with ours. So the way ours worked, we had a heated garment which they put on the legs, and we were looking to assess measures of creatine kinase, which is a metabolite that builds up as a result of heightened muscle damage. Then we were also looking at the delayed onset muscle soreness, and also the counter movement jump performance. So these are measures that we were looking at. But in between their testing days, obviously they were coming in one day, they were doing a protocol which involved them doing 20 drop jumps, 5 sets of them, you know, with 2 minutes rest in between. That was to elicit a lot of muscle damage, okay? And it elicits a hell of a lot of muscle damage. So they would come in, we would take measurements at baseline, then they would go down, we would do the test, we would get them to warm up, they would do the test, the 20 drop jumps, the 20 sets, the 5 sets of 20 drop jumps, I should say. And then afterwards, immediately post, they would come back up to the lab with us. We would take more blood samples, more muscle soreness measures, you know, getting them to rate their perceived pain in a squat, for example, or half squat. Then we would also measure the counter movement performance using a power plate. Oh, no, we didn't. We used what was it called? It's like a light gate. I'll have to see if I can find it. I'll do a full thing on it anyway. A lot of good equipment, you know, nice stuff that we used. It was really cool stuff. I can't remember what it was called. Similar to how they measure like speed when you're running. It's just a different version. But and then we measured them 2 hours post, and then we measured them 24 hours post. So whole thing with ours was short-term recovery within the 24-hour window. But then they had a full week, minimum of a full week, before they come back and they repeated the drop jumps and they repeated the measures for the other condition, whether they were coming back and doing their control or whether they were coming back and doing their experimental, because we randomized them to which one they were going to do first. So that's why you have to have that washout period in order to account for the residual effects of not only the exercise protocol, but then which ones received the treatment. You need to account for the residual effects of that. That's why you need that washout period. That's why they had a washout period in this study. So the results. So one thing that was interesting to see was that mean muscle temperature was similar between conditions as a result of heating. The one thing that did change significantly, however, pardon me, was that core temperature significantly increased only in the whole body condition. That whole body core temperature, they were measuring it, increased to 39. The localized heating condition remained at 37. Remained at 37 degrees. A nice even 37 degrees. So a nice odd 37 degrees, but nice for us. Nice for us humans. That's where we like our core temperature to be for regular physiological functioning. Now we're looking at whole body heating versus the localized condition. It significantly upregulated the majority of AKT/mTOR pathway. All of the things, or rather the majority of the things associated with the AKT/mTOR muscle hypertrophy pathway were significantly elevated by heat therapy, all with the exception of a signaler known as 4EBP-1, but all of them, protein kinase B, mTOR, S6K1, RPS6, that's a ribosomal protein 6, and P-EIF4E, all of them were significantly upregulated. Okay, these are just those anabolic signaling pathways involved in the overall AKT/mTOR pathway. They were significantly elevated. They also increased, whole body only also increased the mRNA expression of heat shock proteins, namely 72, 90, and 25, and also tended to increase the phosphorylation of FOXO1 and FOXO3A. That means it's sort of increasing the phosphorylation of these FOXO1 and FOXO3A molecules, which in turn is bringing the overall number down. Okay, so it's converting them into something else, and as a result, their number is down, and these things are catabolic signalers. Okay, so as a result of this increased level of phosphorylation, however, it is a tendency. Explain what that means now. That would imply that it is decreasing the catabolic signaling. Okay, so what do we mean by tendency? This is important to discuss as well. I remember one of the particularly funny tutors that I had one time in Swansea, explaining a little bit about how depressing it is when you get a tendency in your results. Okay, so what a tendency from a statistical analysis point of view means is that you haven't reached the cutoff point for statistical significance with regards to saying, yes, this happened as a result of our intervention. Okay, so you were familiar before when I've talked about the results sections of studies before, when I mentioned the alpha value, also known as the p-value, or the, it's also known as the alpha. That's its name. And you see it expressed, you'll see it in the methods, for example, as significance, okay? So significance in this instance is us saying that there is a certain percentage chance that what we are seeing is down to the intervention, or what we are seeing is potentially down to something else, you know, another confounding variable or something else to do with the study, or something else not taken into account in the study, okay? The significance value gives us an indication that we can treat the results seriously as having come from the intervention, okay? That significance is set at 0.05 as a standard, okay? That means that the results have to reach a difference. There has to be a difference observed whereby not only it's a significant difference in terms of its magnitude, okay, but it also has to be less than a 5% chance of it coming from anything else but the intervention. Okay, so if you have a p-value, for example, you run the numbers, it can be, for us, when we're looking at in our dissertation, let's use our dissertation as an example again. We are looking at the results from 2 hours post heating and 2 hours post control, 2 hours post exercise in both of our conditions. Okay, we're looking at those two data sets, 2 hours post exercise heating, 2 hours post exercise control, and we see a significant difference one way or the other. Okay, if we see that the p-value when we run the test comes out to, and obviously you've got to make sure the test is appropriate. Okay, there's various different tests, parametric, non-parametric tests, depending on if your data set is normally distributed or not. You have to make sure the test is appropriate. But what happens is that basically if you get a p-value less than 0.05, let's just say it's 0.01, that's telling us that we can reject something called the null hypothesis, which is the opposite of what we wanted to be true, or opposite of what we thought was going to happen, not what we wanted to be true. You should never go in with that motive if you're doing a study rigorously, okay? You're never going in with a motive of what you sort of want to find, okay? You should want to find what is there, not make what is there be what you want to find, okay? I hope that makes sense. But basically, we can reject what's called the null hypothesis, which was the opposite of our hypothesis. And that rejection is basically a confirmation of our hypothesis, okay? That's how we reach, you know, confidence, the necessary confidence in saying that, yes, this came about as a result of our intervention, okay? There is less than a 5% chance of it coming about from anything else, okay? That's the standard for, you know, academic papers in sports science. That's what it was when I was in university anyway. You needed to have a p-value of less than 0.05 in order for anything else to then take place with that data, or for you to even report it, okay? So one of our results did actually come out to a tendency in our dissertation, and it's something you don't even include it in your abstract, okay? Or at least we were advised not to even include it in the abstract. Maybe if you had like a spare word or two that you could use to it, but if you had other things to put in there, don't bother putting it in there. You only report the most important findings in the abstract, and that's why it's important to read the whole paper as well. So the abstract could very easily miss a lot of things out. Sometimes you do get a good glimpse or good indication of the paper in its entirety from the abstract. Other times you don't. You've got to be careful. So when we're looking at this, for example, the tendency would be something as you do the test and it comes out to like p equals 0.06 or 0.055, okay? It's because you can't say in your paper with certainty and with academic or with scientific rigor that yes, it came about as it. You got to put it down as a tendency, and it's just so annoying to have that. And it could be down to something like the study duration. It could be down to something, it could be down to the participant number, okay? Because a lot of things, when you're looking at the data set, a lot of things go into it. Obviously, I'm not somebody who could explain at this present time all of the intricacies of the different, equations that are used and the statistical methods that are used. It's a case of where you plug it into SPSS, make sure that you are using the correct parameters for your data set. So you test it for normality. You see if it's normally distributed. If it is, you use a necessary parametric test. If it's not, you use a non-parametric test. You make sure any we call post hoc analyses are appropriate if you do see a significant differences between two variables, and the program will run it for you. The program will do it for you. Okay, so you just need to make sure that it's set up correctly. Okay, so that's where that comes in. But it's so annoying in that way when you get a tendency, because you can't say with certainty that it did come about as a result of your intervention. But the tendency gives you a clue that it likely is. It likely is, but you cannot say with, you can only say that, you can't say that the evidence supports that. You only say that it may support it, but more research needs to be done. And that's a common theme throughout science anyway. Always more research needs to be done, always. The other thing then, going back to the results again, is that no significant changes were recorded in the control or the single leg conditions. So that gives you an insight into which heating method is going to be superior. Makes sense now. Obviously, this study, I think, came out before our dissertation. That would have been useful to know. That would have been useful to know. Would have ruined our project, but hey-oh. But anyway, so you had 1 hour of the main conclusion from this paper, at least. 1 hour of whole body heat treatment seemed to enhance. In fact, there was more to this results section. I've only picked out the bits that are appropriate for muscle hypertrophy, for example. But there's other things that seem to show that it enhances mitochondrial and cytoprotective signaling. Okay, that's where those heat shock proteins come into effect. And also with a potential, again, that tendency for a concomitant inhibition of FOXO-catabolic transcription factors. So that's interesting. Again, you have that. It definitely seems to show that it increases anabolic signaling, but whether it decreases catabolic signaling, we need stronger data in humans to make that definitive statement. But anyway, let's have a look at this last little bit of a comprehensive review by Kim and colleagues. So this is talking about a little bit more about the mechanisms of heat now, and some of the other ones that seem to be emerging in more of the recent science being conducted into this topic. So one of the things that heat therapy seems to be mimicking or seems to be acting on, which potentially gives it some of these positive hypertrophy signaling benefits, seem to be its effect on intracellular calcium levels. So what we found here is that heat therapy seems to elicit some increases in muscle mass also via its effects on something called calcineurin. Okay, calcineurin is a serine threonine phosphatase that has been shown in some studies to promote myofiber hypertrophy. Now you can go and find those studies in the paper itself. It will be linked down below. So we'll be going through this in more detail in the near future. So, for example, there's a trial here which they mentioned that reported that a single session of whole body heat therapy in rats increased the expression of calcineurin in both the slow twitch soleus muscle and the fast twitch extensor digitorum longus muscle in rats. And the very important thing to consider that they mentioned here is that the increase in soleus muscle mass following heat therapy was partially suppressed by the calcineurin inhibitor cyclosporine A. Okay, so this molecule, cyclosporine A, that inhibits the calcineurin increased secretion or increased buildup, seemed to also reduce or suppress the increase in soleus muscle mass, which was interesting to see. So calcineurin is activated by elevations in intracellular positive calcium ions, okay? So calcium ions also build up as a result of mechanical stress also, okay? So I realize I said also twice in that sentence. That's going to make that sound really weird. So we have a common mechanism potentially here, again highlighting that we talked all the way back at the start of the episode that heat stress seemed to be very similar to mechanical stress in some ways. This is potentially one of the ways why, okay, or one of the ways how, okay. So they say here, there is evidence that heat stress promotes an increase in intramyocyte calcium concentrations through the activation of transient receptor potential valenoid 1 channel. That's also known as TRPV1, and possibly because of an increase in positive calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. As I said, that happens when muscle activity or mechanical stress increases, okay? Yeah, mechanical stress increasing these intracellular calcium ions, and heat stress does it. They both would have the same effect on calcineurin, and then calcineurin would seem to have the positive effects on muscle mass, particularly in the rat soleus, for example, and that gives us a common mechanism by how heat stress and mechanical stress seem to elicit the same benefits. So that's quite interesting to see. So it says here, regardless of the exact causes, the increase in intracellular calcium may serve as a key signal not only to activate calcineurin, but also a number of other pathways involved in the regulation of muscle mass, mitochondrial biogenesis, and muscle glucose transport. So this is a mechanism that goes far and wide to other physiological functions also. So I'm looking at this now. This is from the next bit of the discussion section of this paper. Particular attention has been devoted to the impact of heat stress on the activation of the mechanistic target of rapamycin complex 1, so that's mTORC1. Okay, sometimes you also see that as mammalian target of rapamycin. Seems like the names are used quite interchangeably. And it says here that the highly conserved serine threonine kinase protein complex regulates protein synthesis by phosphorylating ribosomal protein S6 kinase and EIF4E binding protein, also known as 4E-BP. So in a seminal report by Uhara and colleagues, it demonstrated that the increase in soleus muscle mass following whole body heat therapy was preceded by increased P70S6K phosphorylation in rat skeletal muscle. Now, P70S6K was that ribosomal protein S6 kinase 1, okay? That's a key anabolic signaler, and the whole body heat therapy preceded, or while it was preceded by this increased phosphorylation within this rat skeletal muscle, which is indicative of increased mTORC1 activity, that would then in theory be indicative of increased muscle hypertrophic activity. So let's have a look. Is there anything else in this discussion section that we need to look at? So here we go. Of note, it has recently been shown that the TRPV1 mediated increase in intracellular Ca2 plus levels, Ca2 plus is those positive calcium ions, by the way, activates mTOR and subsequent muscle hypertrophy. Conceivably, the aforementioned heat-induced myoplasmic positive calcium ion accumulation may be one mechanism by which this pathway is activated following exposure to heat therapy. So that's quite interesting. It does seem that heat, contrasted to cold, does have a lot of positive benefits, particularly with regards to muscle hypertrophy. As I said, it doesn't seem to have a direct impact or a direct stimulative effect on muscle protein synthesis from what I read before, but it does seem to have a lot of molecular effects on the anabolic signaling pathways. Could be to do with the upregulation of core temperature, upregulation of blood flow to the muscles. We'd have to go to some of the other studies and go into them in a bit more detail to look at that. But the effects definitely seem to be there, whereby it increases the molecular mechanisms of hypertrophy, decreases the molecular mechanisms of muscle atrophy, and that is definitely a win-win combination. So obviously, if you're looking for something to add to your training, it does seem that, for example, post-training heat therapy, if you have a gym with a sauna in it or something like that, or hot water, if you've got like some people have got jacuzzis and stuff like that in their house or in their gym, using them after training, nice bit of relaxation benefit. But also I mentioned that I was going to come back to something now, which I think is very, very important, which is how heat can actually be a very positive net benefit with regards to one of the other main recovery agents with regards to promoting muscle hypertrophy, and that is sleep. So I remember a long time ago listening to the audiobook Why We Sleep by Professor Matthew Walker, and something that sort of blew my mind a little bit, but also then made sense when I thought about it a little bit more. It made a lot of sense, was the use that one can get out of heat prior to going to bed in order to be able to reduce sleep onset latency and also get to sleep quicker and get more restful sleep by using heat to manipulate their body temperature before they go to bed. So a little bit of an insight. I'm by no means a sleep expert, obviously, but he highlights in the book that in order for your body to move into a state of sleep, the core temperature has to actually drop by about 1 degree Celsius. Okay. Now, obviously, if the ambient temperature is off in the room, that's going to be difficult. If it's warm, like in the summer, for example, where you struggle to get to sleep, this is wise because the ambient temperature of the room at night is a lot warmer. That makes it harder for your body to drop its core temperature down. And as a result, you can't get to sleep as easy. You're tossing, you're turning, you're not getting to sleep, you're uncomfortable, you're sweating, all the rest of it. That's why you got a fan. So that's one thing. But one thing you can do, which is particularly useful, obviously try and manipulate the temperature in the room as best you can, but also is either have a hot bath or something where you elevate your core temperature significantly, not too significantly. Don't go giving yourself heat stroke or anything like that. No, it might be a hot shower, before you go to bed. Obviously it just feels nice anyway, but it significantly elevates your core temperature. So when you get out, and you go up to bed, hopefully a relatively cool room, well, what's going to be happening is in order to reach equilibrium, so obviously the ambient temperature of the room is a lot cooler than your body temperature is right now, your body is going to be pumping out blood to the extremities at a very increased rate because it is trying to dissipate all of this heat energy from this increased core temperature. So what's going to happen is as your body is automatically, it's going to do this autonomically. This is all conducted automatically by the body itself, but it's going to be shuttling heat out towards your extremities, towards your hands, rather than constricting it. So obviously, if you're sleeping in a cold room, but you're already cold, your body's going to be trying to conserve its body temperature. It's going to be pulling blood in, but then it's going to be shooting blood away. If you're vastly warmer than the room, in order to reach some sort of equilibrium, it's going to be sending blood out towards your extremities. Another word we might use for equilibrium in this instance is homeostasis, right? It's trying to reach temperature homeostasis. But what's going to happen is as it does that, your core temperature is going to go here and it's going to boom. It's going to drop down significantly. It's probably going to drop right into that range where you need to in order to get to sleep, in order to begin sleeping. So this is where one thing where we mentioned before, in the McGorm study, one of the purported benefits from heating, enhance therapeutic effects that assist recovery and adaptation. Now, this might not be exactly a therapeutic effect because you've got to sleep anyway, right? You have to sleep, okay? Everybody has to sleep at least somewhat every night. I know some people say that they only sleep like 2 hours a night or whatever, like Chef Rush, he was saying he was only sleeping like 2 hours and he had like 24 or 26-inch arms, whatever it was. Absolutely bullshit. Don't care what anybody says. You need to sleep. You need to sleep, okay? If you don't sleep, you're fast forwarding yourself to death, quite literally. One of the things you can do to enhance your ability to get to sleep, decrease sleep onset latency, and odds are you're going to stay asleep more and your sleep's going to be more restful. Maybe have a hot bath if you can't have a hot bath, if you don't have a bath. Maybe have like a hot shower before you go to bed. And you've got, hopefully, a nice little recipe for getting to sleep, provided you keep the temperature controlled in the room, provided it's not too warm in the room, so that no matter how much your body tries to get rid of heat, it can't get rid of heat because the room is too warm. Maybe you open a window, you know what I mean? Maybe don't have the thermostat up. If you have the thermostat up in your bedroom, maybe turn it down, Try to get good ventilation, as I said, opening a window. But then going into sleep, then it will make you sleep a lot better, and then that will have positive impacts on your life as a whole. Nobody is having a good life right now that isn't sleeping well. I can tell you that for a fact. So that's a nice little episode on heat. I think it got a little bit more. It got better towards the middle and better towards the end. Then definitely compared to the last recording. So very, very happy with that. But yeah, that's a little bit of an introduction to heat and the answer to the question of, does heat positively impact muscle hypertrophy, or whatever the question prompt was. Where's it to? Let's go into my history again. Yep. Does heat therapy have a positive effect on muscle hypertrophy? Going back to that consensus rating, yes, it does certainly appear that it does. And obviously, you've got several resources down below that you can go and read, in addition to having listened or watched this. Now, go out and enjoy the benefits of heat therapy, if you can. Oh, I'm very, very tired. But anyway, that's it for me today, guys. That's it from turning up the heat in this episode. I know my numbering system of my episodes are weird, but this is episode... I'm labeling this as episode 40, so I know I've done like 33, I think I've done 32.5, 35.5, and all the rest of it. When I got to fit in some other episodes on other things. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed that episode, guys. Hope you find it useful. Go enjoy, go train hard, go make progress. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, not in that order. And this is your friendly neighborhood thug signing off. Have an amazing day, and Godspeed.